Right, yes, enough of that already, isn't it? Thank you very much for joining me once again, boys and girls, where people continue to be wrong on the internet, they continue to be recidivist offenders, they continue to be Stephen Gumby. Yes, Dr. Gumby, my brain hurts. It'll have to come out, Dr. Gumby. Yes, we're dealing today with his latest offering, which is yet more nonsensical garbage, of course, because that's what you get from Gumby. This one is called The Shocking Truth About the Carnivore Diet. You need to know! Exclamation mark. But well, let's hear about the shocking truth, shall we, Stephen? And we'll put you right where you're wrong. And just a spoiler for you, boys and girls, before we get rolling, that'll be just about everywhere as usual. Rightio, off you go, Gumby.
The shocking truth.
Yes, the shocking truth. Let's hear it.
The carnivore diet that you need to know. Now, let's be clear. I have nothing against a carnivore diet.
Well, that's clearly not true. Based on having watched this video through once already, clearly not true at all, because what you're going to do is espouse ridiculous, mindless, vacuous, unacceptable ideology rather than any actual science. That's a shame for you.
As an elimination diet. In fact, some of my patients use it on a short-term basis to break a cycle of gut inflammation and leaky gut.
Right, so it's an appropriate diet to deal with those issues. So why would you do it short-term, given that it is the species-appropriate, species-specific diet for human beings? Why would you do anything different? Hot water, by the way. I'm now on my, second day of no coffee whatsoever. Interesting times.
And it does support their gut health because it removes all lectin-containing compounds from the diet.
Yes, lectins are not the only thing that cause gut dysfunction, though, Stephen. You are absolutely fixated to a fault on lectins, to the exclusion of understanding any of the actual physiology outside of that, which does indeed play into gut dysfunction. You really need to take the blinkers off, actually, and look more widely.
And let's be clear.
Yes, let's be clear. Being clear is what we're doing.
Plants do not want you to eat them. Even so-called friendly plants that appear on the plant paradox diet. But in some people, their gut is so damaged that even the defense compounds of simple plants like romaine lettuce or broccoli is enough to cause damage to people's health.
Right, so don't do it.
I'll give you a famous example that I've talked about before. Years ago, we got a NutriBullet blender, and my wife decided to make a kale smoothie. Why not? Kale's great for you. She blended the kale smoothie, and I drank it on the way to work. And about an hour later, I was in the bathroom with blowout diarrhea. What the heck happened? Well,
that's pretty obvious, isn't it? If you've got more than 3 brain cells and more than 5 minutes of actually paying attention to what's being said by sensible commentators on nutrition, which does not include Stephen Gumby here.
I can tolerate kale, which is bitter, which has a lot of plant defense compounds, more bitter, more better.
Wrong.
When I eat it whole or cooked, and it's digested slowly. But when we take raw kale and pulverize it, all of a sudden, all of those potentially mischievous compounds were hitting my gut wall, and my gut said, holy cow, we got to get rid of this stuff. And quite frankly, I haven't had a kale smoothie since. Some of my patients are so sensitive to these plant compounds that I have them with irritable bowel or leaky gut, nuke their vegetables, cook them forever, pressure cook them to destroy these compounds. But even that, in some people, is
Even heat and pressure will not destroy all of the plant toxins.
not enough. And we've seen success by eliminating all of these compounds. In fact, I've written before that a lot of these diets, like...
Isn't it incredible that this bloke is unable to sit there and present a video without cards? Amazing.
Like the Atkins diet, like the...
It's Atkins, not Adkins. Atkins was the man's name.
Drinking man's diet, which was a very low carbohydrate diet, basically eliminated these plant compounds. And that's one of the reasons they work for so many people. So maybe I was the father of the carnivore diet.
Oh my God. Are you serious? You really clearly have a very, very serious ego problem, Stephen Gumby. Very serious problem. The carnivore diet was started by humans before they were humans. It was started in proto-humans some 4.5 million years ago. Okay? Not by you a few years back. And even the recent resurgence of carnivore diets in the consciousness of people has nothing whatever to do with you, Stephen Gumby. What's next?
Some people have accused me. But before we say, well, if plants are so bad for you, all of us should be eating a carnivore diet, not so fast.
Yes, exactly that fast.
First of all, there's absolutely zero evidence of long-living people eating a carnivore diet.
And there's absolutely zero evidence of the contrary. Lack of evidence is not evidence of lack. What we have is absolutely zero evidence, really, on any aspect of human nutrition and lifespan whatsoever. We don't even have good, reliable, well-disciplined associative studies, let alone a cause and effect look at this, which we will never have, because you cannot experiment on human beings, and you certainly can't experiment on human beings over a lifetime, keeping all other factors under control, because that is what is required for cause and effect. A scientist would understand that, Gumby. Okay? What you're doing by talking the way you're talking here right now is you are dismissing any idea in people's minds that you could possibly be scientifically competent in any way, shape, or form. Okay? It's a shame for you. And it's shameful that you're doing it. It's unacceptable. It's unprofessional, and it's right outside your lane. You are not a scientist, Gumby. Okay? So stick in your lane.
A society that follows a carnivore diet does not exist.
So, the fact that you can't point to a modern society of individuals who have done this for a lifetime does not mean that it is not possible that when we do, in a lifetime from now probably, look at a group of people, the carnivore community, and see what their longevity is, that we might have some interesting data. Not causal still, but then we will have some data. Okay? Lack of evidence is not evidence of lack. What's next?
And one would think with so much experimentation with food around the world for millennia, if a carnivore diet was as good as its proponents say it is for long-term health, surely we should have been able to find a society that has long-term great health on a carnivore diet.
Well, why would you imagine such a thing? That's a wild speculation. It's total guesswork. There are many reasons why societies behave collectively in certain fashions and not in other fashions. Most of them have nothing whatever to do with health or longevity. Pretty straightforward, really. your line of pseudo-logic there, Stephen Gumby, bears much to be ashamed of from you. It's vacuous, it's destitute, it's desperate in the extreme, it's pathetic, and it's unacceptable. And we're not going to suck that lollipop here in the sensible, rational, scientifically based carnivore community, led by yours truly in this space. You are out of your lane here in a big way, son. What's next?
And that simply does not exist.
So, covered it.
In fact, looking at areas of the world
Oh, here we go. Blue zones, though.
that have extreme longevity, the blue zones.
Okay, number one, Stephen, the blue zones have been debunked thousands and thousands of times by any number of competent, scientifically minded individuals, including but not remotely limited to my good self. It is totally irresponsible, unacceptable, and destitute on your part to continue to espouse this ridiculous, already totally acceptably falsified idea. Bring yourself up into this century, son. Okay? Number one, almost none of these so-called blue zones have remotely acceptable or accurate record keeping that could even remotely support any claim of longevity whatsoever. There's that argument finished right there. That's all we need. On top of that, however, the lifestyles led by individuals in blue zones are vastly, hugely complex, like anybody's life. There are a milieu, an unlimited number of confounders, covariates, collinearities that are completely uncontrolled. This is associative work, and it's associating stuff that cannot be objectively verified, i.e. the age of people in most of these so-called blue zones. It's ridiculous beyond a joke, Stephen Gumby. It is, as I say, totally unacceptable and destitute on your part to continue to espouse this excremental, pustulous falsehood on the so-called blue zones. Okay? I think I've been clear on that, because that's what we're doing today, aren't we? We're being clear.
And other zones that I've talked about in my book, all of these areas have one thing in common.
No, they don't. They have many things in common, and they also have many things which are disparate. We are done with blue zones, you absolute buffoon. What is next?
And no, it's not that they eat beans and rice or grains. Sorry, that's absolutely not true. All of these areas in general eat a very
All in general. Which is it?
low animal protein diet.
No, they don't, Stephen. That is not true either. False. That is a lie. Bald-faced lie. Not correct. The Okinawans, for example, eat no such diet. Okay, what's next?
And as I've written about in all my books, that's what appears to be the major driver.
No, it isn't. False. Completely, utterly false. There is no support, empirically, scientifically, or otherwise, for that assertion. That is your opinion, Stephen Gumby, and your opinion is worth zero in this space. None at all.
Of this longevity. Now, the other thing, if you're going to embark on a carnivore diet, let's be careful about our food choices.
Sure, absolutely. But we do that on the basis of knowledge, not on the basis of your, frankly, mindless guesswork, Stephen Gumby.
That are available by eating animal products. First of all, there is a sugar molecule in beef, lamb, and pork called Neu5Gc.
Yes, Neu5Gc, yes.
that sugar molecule is distinctly different from the sugar molecule that lines the blood vessels of chicken, fish, and us.
Yes, that's Neu5Gc.
We have an antibody that can be developed when
Can be. Yep. See how the word can leaves the other thing entirely on the table? Maybe not too.
we're exposed to Neu5Gc containing foods, that we will attack our own blood vessels with that antibody.
No, not our own blood vessels, not at all, because our own blood vessels express Neu5Ac, not GC.
So we don't want an autoimmune attack on our blood vessels.
No, of course we don't.
And there is considerable experimental evidence
No, there is not, Stephen Gumby. Not at all.
that one of the reasons that red meat promotes heart disease is
No, there is no experimental evidence to support that claim whatsoever. There is a mechanistic speculation study or two out there where in test tubes, in labs away from the whole body situation, various tissues are prompted and elicited to respond to Neu5Gc in a form completely unlike the way it's delivered in the human body when we eat meat. Look, if Neu5Gc was a problem for human beings, there would be a vast, meaningful, clear, and unmistakable difference in observed lifespan and health span of individuals who eat meats containing Neu5Gc versus individuals who do not. No such difference is observable even in the associative data sets on prospective cohorts. Stephen Gumby. That's the end of your argument. You're talking about a hypothetical, mechanistic speculation about a potential problem that in effect, in practice, in human beings, free living in the world, does not exist. So we're done with that too. Blue zones? No. Neu5Gc? No. What's next?
It's actually from this molecule Neu5Gc prompting an autoimmune attack.
In some people at some times under certain circumstances, there has to be an immune dysfunction elicited by other things that might cause an issue, potentially in a very, very few people, actually. Because again, there is no meaningful difference expressed anywhere in the associative prospective cohorts in human beings free living in the world. We're done. What's next?
On our blood vessels. The other thing that's concerning is that tumor cells can use Neu5Gc to hide from our immune system, to cloak themselves. Now, here's the deal. You and I do not produce Neu5Gc. So the only place a tumor cell could get Neu5Gc is for you to eat it.
Yeah, and your body is more likely to respond to a cell which has the Neu5Gc on its surface than the AC. So this makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. I wonder whether Stephen Gumby is going to cite a single piece of research in support of this idea. Let's wait and see, because it doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Beef, lamb, or pork. And that's why there is an association. Now, just remember, association does not mean causation.
Shall we all underline that 100 times, write it in capitals, do lines, until we all understand that association does not inform on causality. Thank you, Stephen Gumby. It's the first sensible thing I think I've ever heard you say on any topic, actually. So, end of discussion then, isn't it, on this? Shall we move on?
But there is an association.
You've said that. Means nothing.
Between.
Look, there's an association between shoe size and mathematical ability in children between 5 and 10 years of age, Stephen. Does that mean we need to stop wasting money on training mathematics teachers and instead genetically engineer children to have bigger feet? You buffoon. What's next?
Red meat eating and cancer, particularly colon cancer.
There is not a meaningful association between red meat eating and any form of cancer whatsoever, Stephen Gumby. That is a lie. I will debate you happily, as politely as you need me to get you to the table, on any assertion that you want to make that any such association is even extant, Stephen Gumby, let alone that it's meaningful, because it simply doesn't. By the way, if you don't know, Stephen, one of the 3 or 4 really quite extensive areas of expertise that I do have is statistical inference, pure and applied statistics, okay? So you'll be talking or debating this with someone who really, really understands this. Do you have the courage of your conviction to do so? Because you are in the wrong here. There is, in fact, no meaningful association whatsoever between the consumption of red meat or processed meat and cancer of any kind, period. Are we done? What's next?
And even breast cancer.
No, false.
So our species became completely different. One of the reasons we think is because of this Neu5Gc mutation.
You think? Not we think. Well, I shouldn't say you think, Stephen, because there's not a lot of evidence that you in fact do.
Okay, so you're not going to eat beef, lamb, and pork.
Yes, I am. Happily. Yes.
That's pretty easy.
No, it isn't. It's stupid. It's inane. You are absolutely evolved via at least 4.5 million years of both positive and negative selection pressures to eat almost exclusively muscle meats and associated fats of large ruminant animals as the basis of your diet. Why would we stop now? Because scientists have identified a sugar molecule, basically, that has absolutely no demonstrable effect on human health whatsoever. In order to subserve your mindless ideology, Stephen Gumby. Why would we do that? We wouldn't. What's next?
I'll eat chicken instead.
That's a pretty bad idea based on how modern chicken rearing and production occurs. I wouldn't be doing too much of that. You can eat some chicken, but not too much.
Has Neu5Gc. Well, not so fast. First of all, most commercially available chicken is incredibly high in lectins and antibiotics.
Yeah. So stick with the good old-fashioned grass-reared, grass-raised, grass-finished if you can get it and you can afford it. Beef. If not, feedlot-finished beef is fine.
Now, wait a minute. Lectins, I thought lectins were in plants.
They are.
And that's true. Lectins are primarily in plant food. Well, you've heard the phrase, you are what you eat.
It doesn't make it true just because it's a phrase. It's not true, Stephen.
But more importantly, you are what the thing you're eating ate.
No, that's not true either. Just as ridiculous, just as false, just as demonstrably false. Mindless.
So if you feed chickens lectin-containing foods like corn and soybeans, which is what most chicken feed is made of, the lectins in those corn and soybeans will become part of the chicken meat. And it's always amazing to me when I have people with tough autoimmune diseases that we take away their organic free-range chicken and their autoimmune disease finally abates. And it's because those organic free-range chickens were being fed organic corn and soybeans.
That is a speculation, Stephen Gumby. That is a complete speculation on your part.
So what can you do? Try to find pastured chickens.
Oh, for goodness sake. No. Eat a species-appropriate, species-specific diet is what you should do, and that is eat muscle, meat, and associated fat of large ruminant animals as the basis of your diet, 80% or so. The rest can be made up with lamb, mutton, pork of various kinds. Try and stay away from the preserved or cured meats. Butter, salt, water, rinse and repeat. Okay? That's what you should do.
But even that is
no plants, by the way, at all. No plants at all. None.
Troublesome. As you know, we've had Farmer Dan from LectinLightChicken.com on this podcast. And Farmer Dan from Texas has perfected lectin-free chicken using lectin-free feed in his pastured chickens. And I'm a huge fan of his. Why else? Well, even though it is technically illegal now to give antibiotics to chickens.
Okay, so the vast majority of this video is actually about chickens, which should not form a large part of the carnivorous diet for a human being.
There's a catch. Chickens can be kept in a warehouse with 100,000 chickens.
Maybe they can in the States. Not so much here.
And they're not in cages. They actually hold themselves up by being crammed in there. Legally, you can keep those chickens in that warehouse as long as you open a door to the outside for 5 minutes.
Again, that sounds like US law, perhaps. It certainly isn't how it is here.
Every 24 hours. And the chicken has, in theory, the ability to go outside. And that actually is the definition of free-range chicken.
Maybe in the States.
The law, which was passed in 2007, actually allows you to feed chickens regular grain, not organic, if the price of organic food goes twice as high as regular. You can switch the chickens to regular food and still label it organic because you
again, that sounds like a US law, not so much here.
Meant well. Now, even though it is illegal to feed chickens antibiotics, if the veterinarian, who of course is paid for by the chicken company, thinks that one of those chickens in 100,000 chickens is sick, you're allowed to give the entire flock antibiotics to treat that one sick chicken.
Again, that sounds very US, perhaps. I don't know if he's right or not about that being the law in the US, but it certainly isn't so here.
In fact, looking at chickens who have supposedly never been given antibiotics, in some studies, 60% of those chickens have antibiotics in their flesh, even though it's illegal to give them antibiotics, certified as antibiotic-free. There are interesting studies showing that urinary tract infections in women can be directly traced to contaminated chicken meat.
No, there is no such evidence at all. It's a mechanistic speculation once again, Stephen Gumby. Cause and effect requires 3 specific criteria in science. If you fail to meet any one of those 3, you are not talking about cause and effect. You are talking about an inference of whatever value. Sort your act out, Gumby.
Antibiotic-resistant strains of bacteria in chicken can lead to foodborne illness. Almost once a month, we hear of a chicken-related foodborne illness. About 1 in 6 salmonella infections and 1 in 3 campylobacter.
Yes, chicken isn't great. That's why it's not ideal as a significant part of a sensible carnivorous diet for a human being. We agree on that. If you're going to eat any chicken at all, it must be well cooked. Well cooked. I hardly eat any chicken at all, personally. That's for another day.
Bacter infections are due to antibiotic-resistant strains of those bacteria in the chicken you're eating.
And remember, all of this vast waffle going on here by Gumby about chickens is precisely because he has already suggested that we should avoid the very thing that we absolutely ought not avoid, that being, for example, the muscle, meat, and associated fat of large ruminant animals on the basis of some sugar molecule that demonstrably has no negative effects whatsoever. Okay? This is just folly, nonsense, falsehood, misinformation, and poor advice from a bloke who is frankly completely out of his lane here. Completely out with his area of expertise. What's next?
Watch, be very careful when it says no antibiotics label. That is not your assurance that these chickens have.
We understood that the first time you said it a few minutes ago in a different way. There's no need to repeat it. Let's move on.
Not been given antibiotics. Look for pasture-raised chicken.
You said that as well already.
Know your farmer. Ask your farmer at the farmer's market, what do you feed your chickens? The correct answer is nothing. They go out in the fields and eat bugs and grass, which is what they're supposed to do. Okay, well, what about eggs? That could be a potential for the carnivore diet.
And it is. Eggs are a useful part of the diet.
Well, if you're going to do that, again, look for pasture-raised or
unnecessary,
at least omega-3 eggs, and preferably look for omega-3 eggs that have been fed algae.
No, bad idea. Very bad idea indeed.
There are a number on the market. But the deal with eggs, in my humble opinion, is
your vacuous, mindless, irresponsible, incompetent opinion
is eggs should be a vehicle to get olive oil into your mouth.
Absolutely not, under any circumstances. Olive oil should not pass your lips ever.
And interestingly enough, eat primarily the yolks. That's where all the good stuff is.
Nonsense. Utter, complete nonsense.
And look for the really bright, intensely orange-colored yolks.
In fact, the nutritional makeup of egg yolks is fairly consistent irrespective of the color.
That's a guarantee, pretty much, that those chickens have been outside eating bugs.
No, it isn't. At all. False again.
Give the whites to your dog. Your dog will love you for it.
No, there is plenty of perfectly good, perfectly bioavailable protein in the white, and you should consume it.
Interestingly enough, about 2.5 eggs a day meet all the protein requirements for your needs. How about fish?
How about it?
Please eat wild fish only, preferably smaller fish like sardines, like mullet. The best seafoods that you can get, wild-caught salmon.
Salmon's a small fish, is it? Goodness sake, son. No.
Alaska salmon by law has to be wild-caught. If you see the words organic salmon, run the other way. They didn't follow the salmon around in the ocean to see if they were eating organically. Those are farm-raised salmon that have been fed organic corn and soybeans. So just because it says organic or Nordic salmon or Scottish organic salmon or Canadian salmon.
We understand. For goodness sake.
Run the other way. That's not what you're looking for. Try to stay away from larger fish.
Like salmon. Okay.
The people that I see with high mercury levels in their urine or their blood, in my practice, are dentists or sushi eaters.
There you go.
These are not your friends. Swordfish, tilefish, grouper has high levels of mercury, and try to avoid these things. And naturally, if you're
Sure, because of course, seafood ought to be a very minor part of the human carnivorous diet. Remember that everything that's not beef basically gets to make up about 15% of your total intakes across time. So fish and chicken and pork and, actually in my case, lamb is probably 10% and everything else is 5%. That's how really I eat these other things. Okay, so do that and you'll be fine. Don't worry about any Neu5Gc. It is not an issue. What's next?
having fish and chips or fried calamari, that's not part of the carnivore diet. Sorry about that. Okay, so why do people get good results with the carnivore diet?
Because it's a species-appropriate, species-specific diet. It's appropriate for human beings, and as such, their health will generally respond positively, with the caveat that the person concerned is undertaking a sensible and well-planned carnivore diet and not doing something stupid.
Well, it's because you're eliminating lectin.
No, you're absolutely fixated, you buffoon. There is a vast array of reasons why the carnivore diet is associated with vastly better outcomes than a non-carnivorous diet, Stephen. Wakey, wakey, smell the bakey, okay?
But all of my carnivore diet patients, when we look at their inflammatory markers, over time, their inflammatory markers, markers of vessel flexibility, begin to get worse and worse.
Nonsense. Maybe in your practice, your patients must be taking your advice, which wouldn't surprise me then, because they'd be doing something wrong. They'll be avoiding the right sort of meats and they'll be eating the wrong sort, like chicken and fish, perhaps, Stephen. Okay? In the generalized public who are undertaking carnivorous diets that are remotely well-planned or sensible based on the muscle meat and associated fat of large ruminant animals, grass-fed, their markers are all excellent and vastly improved since they changed to that diet, any of them that have been doing it for a year or more. So I don't know where you're getting your numbers from.
So short term, to fix a problem with an affront of plant compounds against your gut, I've got nothing wrong with that.
Right, but you also have no idea what you're talking about, Stephen. You're completely out of your depth and out of your lane. You're talking about things outside your area of expertise, clearly, like science. You've got no basis to be making these ridiculous claims and steering people away from the exact thing they absolutely ought to be eating. It's criminal. It's unacceptable. You should go to prison for what you're doing here, Stephen. It's that simple. What's next?
But long term, I can tell you in my patient population.
Which is how many, Stephen? And are they following your advice otherwise? Because that's probably the part of the problem.
It looks like a recipe for disaster.
Well, then you don't know what you're talking about. It's not a recipe for disaster at all. I can point you to a number of individuals who have been consuming a sensible carnivorous diet for multiple decades without any health concerns or complaints of any kind. So how do you like them apples?
And again, if this was such a good idea.
It is a good idea to eat a properly planned, sensible carnivorous diet, yes.
We should be able to find.
You've said this already, and it was vacuous the first time. It was destitute the first time. It had no teeth whatsoever the first time, and repeating it will not make it any stronger. It is still vacuous, mindless nonsense, Stephen Gumby.
Society with incredibly long-lived, healthy people.
You've said all of this.
People who have adopted a carnivore diet. I'm sorry, they
You've said this.
just can't be found.
Yes, so what? We've covered this already.
Finally, just remember, as in general, and I agree with Dr. Walter Longo.
Well, that points further to your lack of credibility in science. While Longo has a vast, huge, voluminous output into the so-called scientific literature in recent years, that doesn't make him credible. That doesn't make what he is saying correct. A lot of what he says is vacuous and scientifically destitute, in fact. That's for another day.
This. The less animal protein that you can get, the better.
Well, that's an example of a vacuous, unsupportable statement. That's exactly what I'm talking about. That is false. Utterly false. Demonstrably false, in fact.
And when I ask my patients to reduce animal protein,
well, there you go. If they're following your advice, no wonder their outcomes are poor over time. Because you're giving them contraindicated, erroneous, dangerous, demonstrably damaging misinformation, Stephen. You ought to be struck off the medical register. For a start, as an MD, you have no business whatsoever counselling patients in nutrition. That is not your field of training. You are out of your lane. Get back in line. What's next?
I see dramatic reductions in a blood marker called insulin-like growth factor. And as a general rule, the lower your insulin-like growth factor, the longer you live.
Nonsense. False again. Absolute rubbish. Goodness gracious, this is appalling, boys and girls.
The longer you live well.
Nonsense. No studies show any such thing anywhere in the literature. This is shit that he's pulling out of his anal sphincter, frankly.
Quite frankly, the less chance of cancer development.
Wrong. False. Absolute rubbish.
So why not go after that?
Why not, Stephen, you come and sit down with me. As I said, I'll be polite to you as you need me to be to get you to the table. We'll do it professionally, and I will tear you to pieces on all of this. There is simply no evidence in support of what you're talking about extant anywhere in the literature. There is no valid inference that would point that way whatsoever. There is the challenge, publicly made. Come and front me on this. Okay, what's next?
So, is a carnivore diet a great idea?
Yes, it is, if it's sensibly applied. I.e., about 80% or more, the muscle, meat, and associated fat of large ruminant animals grass-fed for preference. Other meats, sure, in much smaller amounts, much less regularly. No plant material. Eggs, fine. Butter, fine. Dairy, plus or minus, individual choice, depending on how you do on dairy. Jobs are good in.
Well, as the ultimate elimination diet.
Oh, you're just talking absolute rubbish, Stephen. Complete garbage. Anyway, challenge issued. Front up. If you're so confident in yourself, back it up. My email address can be found on the About tab on the front page of my channel, Stephen.
I have nothing wrong with the carnivore diet in the short term.
Well, then you're an idiot, because it's entirely indicated long-term, multiple decades lifespan. It is the species-appropriate, species-specific diet. It is that which we have evolved precisely to consume.
But once you fix the underlying problem,
there aren't any problems with the carnivore diets if it's well formulated.
And you know how to do that if you've been watching this podcast. Once you fix that problem, it's time to wean yourself from the carnivore diet.
Nonsense. Absolute rubbish.
And if you're going to do the carnivore diet, please try to think about small fish, try to think about shellfish like clams,
No, they're a minor part of the diet, Stephen.
like scallops, like oysters, like mussels.
Yes, we know what small seafood is, for goodness sake.
And small fish like sardines. That's the safest way to practice a carnivore diet.
No, it isn't. False. Wrong again, Stephen.
I think you're going to love this.
Okay, so we're done. Not one single thing to recommend or commend this video on. Rancid, pustulous, excremental, mindless, ignorant, vacuous nonsense from a bloke who is frankly completely out of his depth and out of his lane, speaking about an area that is not his area of expertise. Unacceptable, malpractice. This is the kind of thing that needs to stop. Join me next time, boys and girls, when someone else will be wrong on interwebs, because there really is a lot of that going on. Stephen, email me. Let's have a debate, sunshine. Nice and politely, nice and professionally, if you like. Absolutely. Bring your references and I will tear you and them to pieces, you buffoon. Right. Don't let the door hit you in the six on the way out. You know the drill. Clean up the briefing room, all of that. See you next time, boys and girls. Ciao for now.